When I was in my last few weeks of high school in England, my favourite teacher, the speech and drama teacher, said to me, "Geraldine, you are very talented, but I don't believe you're going to make a great dramatic actress. No. I believe your niche is going to be in the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation." Well, that Mrs. Blythe was my favourite teacher, as I said, at Paul's Convent, which was the convent boarding school I went to from the age of 11 to the age of 16. And I took every class from her that I possibly could. I did speech exams, I did speech festivals, I was in plays. I was the lion in Androcles and the lion. Grrr, 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 grrr. What did she mean I wouldn't make a great dramatic actress? But she spoke those words to me just before I was going to leave the school, and so I really took them to heart. And I thought, okay, so I'm going to work for the BBC. Now, I knew it was very, very difficult to get into the BBC at any level at all. It was like winning a gold medal. But I was determined, with my usual enormous enthusiasm, that I wasn't just going to work for the BBC. Oh, no. I was going to be the head of the prestigious drama department of the BBC. I just knew it. Well, I kept that vision ever before me as I went to college, and then I did a stage management course. And it came to be the summer before I was going to apply when I got a break. I was flying home to Spain to see my parents. Now, my parents had retired to the south of Spain, which is the equivalent here of someone's parents retiring to Florida. And sitting next to me on the plane was this lovely man. He had kind eyes, he had a big bushy beard, he was about 35, he was married, and his name was Danny. And I said to him, "And what do you do?" He said, "I'm a cameraman in the drama department of the BBC." I said, I want to work for the BBC. He said, "It's very, very difficult to get in." I said, "I know. Do you have any tips?" Well, he said, the best thing to do is to get a temporary contract, a 4-month contract. He said, and talking to you, probably the best one for you would be a temporary relief floor assistant. That's the lowest form of life on the studio floor. He said, but if you get that, then you've got your foot in the door and you'd be on your way. He said, but they are very difficult to get. I tell you what, I'll help you. And he put his hand in his pocket and he drew out a card and he wrote a name on the back and he gave it to me and he said, when you get back to England, phone up this man and tell him that I said you had to have an interview. And he'll give you one. He said, and then if he likes you, he'll make sure you get the real interview, which is the committee interview. And if he likes you, he'll make sure that you get through that and you'll get the job. I said, thank you. Thank you, that's incredible, thank you. He said, just a minute. He said, I want to warn you about one thing. Now, you've got to remember, I was 22 or so, and even more gorgeous than I am now. I know, thank you so much. He said, this man really likes women. He said, and he particularly likes young women, and I think he'd really rather like you. He said, but don't play that game, okay? Don't play that game. And I thought to myself, play that game? Play that game? What does he mean, play that game? I won't have to play any game. I knew what Mrs. Blythe had said. I was going to succeed on sheer professionalism alone. I just knew it. Yes, of course. But I didn't say that to him. I just thanked him very much and I took the card. And when I got back to England, I took it out and I looked at it. Mr. Ramsbottom. What an unfortunate name. Well, I phoned up Mr. Ramsbottom and I got an interview. And I was so excited, but I was also a little nervous, even though I knew what Mrs. Blythe had said. And so I did what many women in this room would have done in similar circumstances. I went out and bought myself a new outfit. I went to an upmarket and yet fashionable department store because I wanted to strike the right balance. I wanted to be practical but also trendy. And I found the perfect thing. It was a little burgundy and green tweed skirt, a little matching blouse, a little crossover sweater with a piece de resistance that put me at the edge of 1980s fashion. It was a pair of bright green Mary Quant hose. They were gorgeous. Now, I bought 2 pairs. I was sensible, just in case. And I tried one on. Well, they fit beautifully. I ran all over town in them. I got lots of admiring glances. And then I got a run. Now, this wasn't just a normal run. No. This run was the size of the transatlantic railway. I mean, it was huge. It was this enormous thing. But of course, it didn't matter because I had that other pair. Well, the day of the interview came. I was pottering around. I was half dressed. And then I looked at the clock and I realised I'd mistimed this. I had to leave the apartment now to get on the tube, to get to the BBC, to the interview. Well, all I had to do was put on those hose. So I got out the packet, I opened it, I started to put them on, which is when I realised that this pair was faulty. The crotch only came up to the knees. Well, what could I do? They matched the outfit. I hobbled out of there. I got into the tube, I got to the BBC. I was sitting in the foyer when Mr. Ramsbottom himself came to get me because his secretary was sick that day. And he motioned for me to follow him. And I did my very best. But it's very hard to keep up with a man who walks very fast when you're shackled around the knees by a pair of bright green hose. And I realised that even before I'd opened my mouth, my dream interview was fast descending into an audition for March of the Penguins. Well, the spoken part of the interview went well, and then Mr. Ramsbottom said, Geraldine, he said, I'd like to show you around the studios. And I said, well, Mr. Ramsbottom, lovely, thank you so much, wonderful. Now, the BBC studios in those days, they were littered with great coils of wire and great piles of wood, and I did my best to get over them. But we came to a particularly large pile of wood, and Mr. Ramsbottom looked at the wood, and he looked at me, and then he held out his hand and he said, I think perhaps you need some help. And I looked at that hand and I thought, could I? Should I? And I'm afraid I did. I took hold of his hand and I looked deep into his eyes as I got my legs over that pile of wood. And then I carried on holding his hand and looking into his eyes just a moment longer than I should have done. I was a hussy. I was a brazen hussy. A hussy, I tell you, an absolute hussy. Well, as soon as that interview was over, I hobbled out of there as quickly as I could. But Mr. Ramsbottom came through. I got the committee interview and they told me they were going to let me know by mail. Of course, it was snail mail. Well, every morning, as soon as I heard the plop of the mail on the mat, I was out there. But nothing came the first week, nothing came the second week, nothing came the third week. But on the fourth week, there it was. On the mat, there was a letter from the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation. I picked it up. It was very light. Was this a good thing or was this a bad thing? I put it up to the window. There was no use. I couldn't see through it. I was going to have to open it. I slit it open. I noticed that my hands were trembling and I took out the piece of paper and my palms were beginning to sweat just slightly and I read it. It said, Dear Miss Buckley, Dear Miss Buckley, we are delighted to be able to offer you a contract. Yes, I'd done it. I got into the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation. I was on my way to the top, fame and fortune. Here I come. Yes. The only thing is that all that glisters is not gold. And I realised after just a few weeks, of course, want to get in the job, I had to then go and do it. And I realised after just working there for a few weeks that perhaps I wasn't best suited to work behind the scenes of the BBC. And I had lots of time for that information to go from my heart to my head. Because I spent most of my time standing around with a clipboard not doing anything. And it was after a few months that I realised that Mrs. Blythe, although she'd She'd been so well-meaning. She'd not got it right. I clearly wasn't destined to work behind the scenes of the BBC. And that's when I realised that although we should take advice, we can't follow somebody else's dream for our life. Whether it be a teacher or a parent or a clergy person, we've got to discover what we were created to do and then go and do that. And so at the end of the 4 months, I didn't renew my contract, but I came over here to America. I went on with the next adventure. Thank you.